people are going to rightly or wrongly draw the conclusion that if you take on powerful interests in New Jersey, the result is your office gets eliminated or you get targeted. And, we see that in Washington right now. We're seeing that from the Trump administration. We need to be an example here in a state that, unfortunately, and we talked about this, Mark, has a stain of a history of corruption. We need to be redoubling our efforts to combat corruption, not undercutting agencies and people who are doing good work.
Every story and everybody's got one. This is the Jersey Angle. Everybody, welcome to the Jersey Angle podcast. I'm Brian Donohue.
And I'm Mark Bonamo.
We're here in the Mark Twain Diner in Union Township.
Yes.
A lot of moving parts to this, to this episode. Right. You heard the voice there of Attorney General Matt Platkin. That was one of two interviews you did with him. They're going to hear a lot of those in this episode.
Right.
And he was Platkin was talking about something that happened this week, which I think a lot of long-time Trenton observers and good government advocates absolutely had their minds blown this week at this hearing. The Platkin was at the center of this whole thing.
Where a bill is
talk about this.
A bill is proposed where one of the state's most important watchdog agencies, the Office of the State Controller, essentially is going to have many of its powers gutted at a time when you would think we even need more watchdogs in New Jersey, not less.
Right. So Platkin has ruffled a lot of feathers there. But let's go back and give for people who don't follow this stuff closely, a look at the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office in New Jersey has been around forever, but around 1970 or so, there were two problems. Anyone familiar with New Jersey knows we have, surprise, surprise, political corruption and organized crime, right? So
Absolutely.
around 1970, they take the AG's office and they boost it. They create the Division of Criminal Justice to try to tackle these two problems, right? Mm-hmm. This is, all right, now we got a big, strong AG's office.
Right.
So this is like a little personal point. Fast forward now 20-something years, and a young reporter with a full head of hair, I'm assigned to cover the AG's office.
Right.
And so I figure, oh man, all right, I'm going to be covering political corruption cases. I'm going to be covering the mob. I'm going to be covering. This is going to be.
Absolutely.
Probably 3 years on that beat, I don't think I covered like any of that. No indictments, nothing.
No cause for indictment.
There was a lot of work done with the state police and racial profiling back then, but it was not.
Right.
And then subsequently, like the AG's office, I remember looking up at the big, huge Justice Center complex in Trenton, which we called the Death Star, because it looks architecturally like the Death Star, and in the sense of what the hell is going on. You would look at that building like, what the hell is going?
Right.
What do they do in there?
Mm-hmm. Right.
What do they?
Right. When is the death ray actually come out of the Death Star to do something to corruption?
What do they do?
Come on.
And then subsequent AGs, I'm not like slighting them all, but didn't exactly live up to the mandate of that.
Didn't seem to be overtly aggressive.
And then along comes Platkin, right? And he, I think, actually filled that role. Here, our food is here.
Oh, yeah.
Our waitress is bringing our food. Nice, perfect timing. So along comes Platkin.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks. Right. So along comes Platkin now. Actually, I think his story is really interesting because, and your interviews with him that we're going to hear now, tell the story of someone. This is what happens when you try to actually fulfill that mandate.
Right.
This is probably why a lot of AGs didn't do anything in the Death Star all that time.
So what happens when you actually try to do your job as the chief law enforcement officer of the state of New Jersey,
and this is what's
who's supposed to be fighting corruption and organized crime and whatever else?
Yes. So let's listen to you sat down with Platkin. We'll listen to that interview now, and then you also you did a sit down with him, and then this is before this hearing, and then you spoke with him a little bit short or after, and we're going to hear both of that. All right.
You bet.
So let's listen to your very excellent, awesome sit-down interview with Matt Platkin.
Attorney General Matt Platkin, welcome to the Jersey Angle podcast.
It's great to be here with you, Mark. Long time coming.
Exactly. So, I'd like to start out with a quote you made. This is back in November of 2024, both 2024 and 2025, eventful years for you.
Now I'm nervous.
It's time for people in positions of authority in the state to spend a little more time questioning their own role in creating or enabling a system of corruption, and a little less time threatening those of us who are trying to do something about it. You've taken a very aggressive public approach to your job, different from a lot of your predecessors. Speaking to that quote, what has this experience been like for you as Attorney General?
Look, I think when you look across the country, and New Jersey, unfortunately, is no exception, people's faith in government is at an all-time low. For me, I started out before law school in city politics in San Antonio, Texas, and saw my share of corruption up close and personal. I'm from New Jersey, but I spent a little time down there, and that experience shaped really how I viewed the world. And people think corruption is this amorphous thing. Like, no, when you're skimming off the top, it means that somebody's not getting what they're entitled to. It means kids aren't getting school programs. It means people aren't getting their health care. It means we're not investing in the types of things that make people's lives better and more affordable. So corruption matters, and it matters to me. And I tried to take it seriously as Attorney General, because that is literally what they expect me to do at a time when the federal government is frankly enabling corruption. But even before this administration, the Supreme Court has made it much harder for federal law enforcement to take on corrupt actors.
Right.
It falls on us in positions of authority at the state level, and particularly the Attorney General as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, to say, look, this is a problem. This matters. And we got to show the public that we are taking it seriously. And if you abuse their trust, you're going to be held accountable.
Now, going in and out between the federal and state levels, one thing you've done, there's literally been dozens of legal actions you've taken against the Trump administration. Whole range of things. The challenge to the executive order ending birthright citizenship, the funding freeze, amicus briefs against imposing sanctions on law firms for anti-Trump causes and work that they've done. Why do you think it's important to fight Trump when your job is to mind the store in the state of New Jersey?
Yeah, I don't think I'm fighting Trump. I mean, I've never woken up and been like, hey, we got to sue Trump today. We haven't sued him in a few days. No, we're standing up for the rule of law. We're fighting for our residents. Same way I've taken on corrupt actors in our state. Same way I've taken on social media companies that hurt our kids, or opioid companies that put an epidemic, or people that polluted our cities, or whatever you name, like any person who's or company or organization that's violated the law, we even hesitated to sue them and hold them accountable if they're hurting people in New Jersey. This case, or these cases rather, just happen to be involving the President of the United States and his administration. There's a lot of things he's done that we haven't filed lawsuits over. He's the president. He has broad powers. He got elected last year with a significant majority. We respect that. But what he can't do is he can't abuse the law. He can't punish people in our state unlawfully. He can't disregard what the Constitution says. All the things you just mentioned are in that camp. That's why we've been successful in just about every one of our cases, because these aren't sort of close calls on the margins. I mean, just last weekend, I was up all night, several days in a row, fighting to make sure that this administration didn't unlawfully keep food off the tables of 800,000 New Jerseyans, 350,000 kids. I know you love the city of Newark. There are more kids in our state on SNAP food assistance than the entire population of Newark. And so that's the type of thing we're fighting for. I think if I didn't do it, I wouldn't be doing my job.
Right. Do you think the law has been weaponized?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we haven't seen this type of weaponization, ironically, from an administration that came in saying, we're going to stop the weaponization of law enforcement. You've seen patently political and absurd indictments coming out of the Eastern District of Virginia. You've seen weaponization, again, for the first time in American history, the weaponization of hunger, starving 42 million Americans, and most cynically, I think, on Veterans Day, telling over 1 million veterans that they're not going to support their food. Millions of children, seniors, folks with disabilities. What are we doing here? I've been around long enough now to understand how politics and budget fights work.
Right.
They're not always smooth, easy negotiations. And we're clearly in a government shutdown. You want to make your point, you got a majority in Congress, you got a majority in the Senate. Go make your point. don't use kids in Newark and in cities across our state and towns across our state, rural, suburban, urban, don't use their hunger as a political pawn. And we saw that over the past couple of weeks for the first time in American history.
Now, a lot of what we're talking about in terms of, what is the relationship between the Attorney General's office and the federal government, nationally, not just in the state, is this concept of the rule of law. Now, the rule of law to a lot of people can be this very esoteric thing.
For sure.
What does it mean to you?
It's funny. I've thought a lot about this. Obviously, there was this whole debate leading up into the 2024 election about the rule of law. And I'm a lawyer. I like the law. But I don't think people wake up in the morning, I certainly don't as a parent of two kids, and say, let me consider if the rule of law is working today. Right. That's not top of mind for most people in our state and most Americans. And so I think we can get lost in these abstract concepts of, who has the right to go to court and this and that. But at the end of the day, what people do worry about, I am sure those parents are like, wait a second, I was promised my SNAP EBT card would be loaded on the first of the month, and it's not. Mm-hmm. Well, why isn't it? It's because this administration hasn't followed the law. They were told that if you have a kid with autism, you were told that that student is going to go to school and have services provided to him to meet his or her needs and make sure their parents have comfort that their kid's going someplace safe. And they wake up and suddenly that's yanked away, as it has been multiple times over the last year. Why isn't it? Well, it's the rule of law. You have your rights violated by the government, and you can't find a lawyer to go to court. Why is that? It's because this administration has weaponized the rule of law. So I do think we get lost in abstraction a lot of times, and we're talking up here. But at the end of the day, the reason why we have the rule of law, quote unquote, is so that when you're promised something, you get it. And that there are rules that say government doesn't get to just sort of decide willy-nilly who gets what. That people have protections, that you can't be hurt. That's why we put these things in law. It's not because we think everyone's going to do it. It's because, or we think it's politically popular. We put them in law to make sure that even in times when it's not popular, that you're protected. And so, I think as we've gone through the last year, more people have understood that real concept of what the law means in their lives, even if the theoretical, philosophical debate that some folks are having is totally lost on them.
One way that we can see the impact of something that's going on in the legal world is the federalization of law enforcement. You see the National Guard in places like Washington, D.C. That's a particularly powerful image for a place like Newark, where we saw the National Guard in the street during the 1967 riot and/or rebellion in Newark. Now also, in terms of what's happening with ICE, there's the Immigrant Trust directive here in New Jersey. Do you think that should ultimately become law? Of course, the whole idea is that it doesn't allow local law enforcement to help out the federal government, federal agents in terms of enforcing immigration laws when it comes to a civil matter.
Yeah, look, people love to make like a boogeyman out of this. This is just common sense stuff. With the Immigrant Trust Directive, and by the way, I do think it should be a law. Okay. It makes a lot of sense and it works in practice. And let me just explain what it does. If you're a violent criminal, you've even been accused of a crime, of course we cooperate again. Nobody wants them here. I've never been to a community that says, let's keep more violent criminals in our streets. And by the way, we have the lowest level of gun violence on record in New Jersey history, 3 years running under my tenure. So I've got some credibility here. Mississippi, which is sending National Guards, men and women to DC, 6 times the level of gun violence we have here in New Jersey. So I don't want to be lectured by them about how to keep our community safe. Right. Of course we cooperate on violent criminals. Of course, if you're convicted of a felony, we cooperate. But what we don't do is say that we are going to engage using our local law enforcement, the 42,000 law enforcement officers who are sworn to protect our residents, in mass civil immigration proceedings that would prevent people from calling 911 when they need help. Right. And I'll give you a specific example of this. There was a woman, tragically, victim of domestic violence, earlier this year, stabbed in the neck. Mm-hmm. Horrific crime. Other individual was charged with attempted murder. She was undocumented. ICE picked her up. How do we think that is going to encourage victims of crime to come forward. How are we going to prosecute the bad guys if people don't feel confident that they can call 911, not fear for their own status? If they've done nothing wrong, they're a victim of a crime, they're a witness. We want them talking to law enforcement. That's why law enforcement across the state has supported this directive. And, beyond the directive, as a country, I want secure borders. I think most people do. We don't want gang members coming in this country. I think most people would agree to that. I also don't want Americans picked up in streets across this country simply because they look like an immigrant, hogtied, broken ribs, left on freezing cold streets, had their doors broken down without a warrant. American citizens. These are real stories happening in American cities right now. And I'm sorry, we should be talking about that more. We shouldn't be afraid to say that's wrong. So all the Immigrant Trust Directive does is it builds trust. We've had police chiefs swear to it in our proceedings. But there is a bigger issue here that this government is targeting purely innocent American citizens. And the consequences for them, they just move on. But for that family, I've seen videos of Americans left on the street. I've seen videos of people ripped out of their cars with 1-month-old babies next to them. That is not who we are either. And we should be unafraid to say that.
Now, the Immigrant Trust Act, to go further, why do you think it's important to codify this measure that's already been in place for a couple of years directly into law? We saw this in the gubernatorial campaign. Mikey Sherrill, the ultimate victor, said, well, I'm going to follow the law when it comes to this, but it's not yet law. Why should it be law?
Well, in New Jersey, a directive issued by the Attorney General carries the force of law.
Right.
So for law enforcement, it is law. Look, I don't think this should be subject to the whims of who's in my seat. I didn't put the Immigrant Trust Directive in place, but I've been proud to keep it there. And I think if it's the democratic will of the legislature and the governor, it should be codified into law. And I've said that. So, we do that all the time. There are policies, administrative actions that people take in government. The legislature decides it is an important step, and they want to make sure it stays permanent. This is something so common sense. They've been trying for years to spin it into something it's not. It is common sense. We just want you, if you've done nothing wrong, to call 911 when something's going wrong. And it is a policy, by the way, that has been upheld at every court that has considered it, including by judges appointed by President Donald Trump. So this, from a legal perspective, this really isn't a close call. And from a policy perspective, from how law enforcement functions, I don't know how in the most diverse state in America, in the densest state in America, are law enforcement supposed to function if people won't call 911 because they think their cousin or their relative or somebody unrelated to the issue they're having might be deported.
Now, the role of state attorney generals in terms of what's happening in our country. Increasingly, people are saying, well, the Department of Justice had traditionally tried to stay out of politics. Now, increasingly, it seems like in terms of the law, politics is being phased in. How important do you think the role of state attorney generals is going to be in terms of the law going forward?
I think state AGs have been important for a long time. Look, going back to the 90s when state AGs came together and said, we're not going to let tobacco companies sell these harmful cigarettes to our kids. It was state AGs who led that work. It was state AGs who took on the opioid industry and stopped an epidemic. It was state AGs who have led, and I've been one of the leaders of this, the biggest lawsuits against social media companies that are creating a youth mental health crisis against their kids. And it's been state AGs that have sued Democratic and Republican administrations when they disagree with them. That's the way the law works. I think that is us doing our job. And I also have to say, so much of the attention is focused on what we're doing with respect to the Trump administration. I get that. Those are really salient issues for a lot of people. But we are still also the last kind of bastion of genuine bipartisan coordination. And I mentioned the social media cases. I think I would say this as a parent of 2 kids. This is one of the causes, if not the cause of our generation. Are we going to make sure, the same way we did with tobacco, that we're not giving to our kids these products without any restrictions that these companies know, based on the documents we have, they know cause significant mental health harms to our kids? Well, Congress hasn't acted. If anything, Congress has protected these companies. State legislatures have acted, and they've given AGs tools to hold them accountable. We're going into generative AI, huge potential. Well, huge potential. Also huge risks. Congress isn't acting. Federal agencies, thanks to the Supreme Court, are powerless. But states can act. And I am the chief law enforcement officer for my state. When our legislature and our governor pass a law that gives people protections, if we don't then enforce that law, then they're just nice words on a paper. They have to mean something to people. And the principal way we enforce those laws is through lawsuits against companies that violate them. And so I've not been bashful about doing that. And I think state AGs play a really critical role at this time when, unfortunately, Washington just isn't working. So much of the new and emerging challenges have fallen on the states to address.
You talk about formative experiences in government, but you grew up here in New Jersey. Remind me, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Morris County.
Right. So when you were growing up, did you see things around you that you thought to yourself, I don't know, this isn't quite right. This is giving me somewhat of a hinky feeling in terms of what the government's doing?
Definitely saw a lot of mob stuff growing up. Florham Park in East Hanover had its share.
Oh yeah.
Great places to grow up, by the way. Public school in New Jersey, we are a powerhouse. We produce more talent than any state in the country, pound for pound, in academics and athletics, you name it. But yeah, look, and for me, it was sort of getting involved and realizing, like, wow, sometimes the deck really is stacked. And sometimes people really do have special access. And why is that? Why should somebody who knows the right person get a contract when somebody who's just as qualified and maybe can do it better and cheaper can't? Mm-hmm. You see that a couple of times and it just scratches your head. And you start thinking, well, how much is this costing us? Right? We always talk about property taxes in New Jersey. Like, how much is this corruption costing us? How much giving out that sweetheart deal that's 40% more expensive than the next guy? Who's paying for that?
Right.
You and I are paying for that.
Right.
And so I saw that enough early on in my career to know it wasn't right.
Right.
And, I believe that without accountability, the corruption won't stop. And we're at a time right now, again, going back to where we started, faith in institutions broadly, but particularly government, hasn't been this low since the Civil War. And that's a really scary fact for our democracy. If we want people to believe that government can work for them, then we damn well better show that government is working for them. And we can say all we want, we're doing all stuff, but no, the vast majority of Americans and the vast majority of New Jerseyans don't believe that. And my personal view is, unless people are standing up and holding those accountable who do abuse that trust, then we're just going to further that cynicism that people believe. And the vast majority of people doing government work are doing good things. They are true public servants. The people who stayed up with me all week last week fighting for SNAP, they're not corrupt. Mm-hmm. But unless we show that when somebody does break that trust, they're held accountable, we all get painted with that broad brush.
Now, one of the most dramatic moves that you took against corruption, of course, was in June of 2024, a 13-count indictment against South Jersey Democratic power broker George Norcross. Essentially allegations of it's a criminal enterprise, official misconduct, problems with the usage of tax credits, intimidation. Now, one of the most surreal things that I've ever seen in New Jersey politics is the day you announce the indictment. George Norcross shows up. He's tan. He's got the silver hair. He's not wearing socks. And he's directly staring you down. What was that like?
Listen, that's what I'm gonna say. This is a live case, so I'm not gonna comment on it. But here's what I'll say. I've been in now New Jersey politics and government at pretty high levels for 10, 11 years. You develop a thick skin. Doing the right thing isn't always popular. Right. People don't always like it. And I go to sleep at night knowing very well that I wasn't afraid of taking on tough fights even if it upsets some powerful people. When you do hard things, sometimes you get criticism for it, and sometimes people don't like it.
Right.
But the truth is, unless you're willing to bear that, you're never going to make the change you need. So without commenting on any specific case or the way any particular defendant did or didn't behave, if they think anything can scare me, they don't know me by now.
Right.
Like, the things that scare me are, how are my kids safe? Am I gonna be able to get the things done before my time runs out here that I want to get done?
Right.
What people say or try to intimidate me, it's water under the bridge.
In terms of that time, there is an appeal to the ruling in terms of that indictment. It was dismissed. Do you think the appeal will go forward if you're no longer the Attorney General?
Look, any case will be up to, I would never sort of dictate what an Attorney General should or shouldn't do. What I will say is, as the Attorney General, you are responsible for upholding the law for 9.5 million people. The New Jersey Attorney General is arguably the most powerful Attorney General in the country, broad authority. And there is a reason for that. We created the strength in our Attorney General's office and the power over the criminal justice system specifically to combat the mob and corruption.
Mm-hmm.
In the late 60s, there was exposés about how the mob and corrupt political actors had controlled the state. And so what did they do? And this is actually a good story. New Jersey's reaction wasn't, that's just how things are. No, they wrote into law the strongest state prosecution agency and powers of any Attorney General in the country. Criminal Justice Act of 1970. That is the history of my department. And it is in our DNA to hold powerful people, institutions, organizations accountable when they break the law. And so again, no, I'm not commenting on any specific case. You have to judge each case on the merits as you see them. But I do believe it is essential that whoever has this job, next year, 10 years, 30, 50, whenever it is years from now, and I believe I've tried to live up to this, you cannot be afraid of taking on tough fights. There are other places you can hide. The Attorney General is not a place you can hide.
Right. In terms of not being a place you can hide, there are some things that are very public. And again, not talking specifically about a case, but during the time that Mr. Norcross is under indictment, had this event, and 5 governors of the state of New Jersey show up. Christie, Kane, McGreevey.
Christie doesn't like me very much.
Yeah, that's true. And, Murphy, they all show up. And, does it ever feel to you that, you're Don Quixote? Like, the power establishment is lined up behind some of your very serious legal enemies. Are you all in this by yourself? Why not work with the system? You seem outraged.
I mean, I'm not Don Quixote because the windmills are real. Look, corruption is a real thing. People can pretend it doesn't exist. You go out on the street and ask anybody if they think there's corruption in our government, what do you think the answer is going to be?
Right.
They've seen too much of it. They're seeing it right now. You're seeing a president make billions of dollars during his first 10 months in office.
Right.
So, I go to sleep at night knowing very well that I'm doing the right thing. And if it upsets people, I'm not going to apologize for that.
Right.
If we were doing something that I felt was unjust or wrong or abusing the extraordinary privilege we have as a state law enforcement agency, yeah, I would have real concern. But that's not what we've done. What we've done is stood up for the rule of law. We've stood up against corruption. We've fought powerful organizations and individuals who have broken the law in our estimation. That's it. And that is not something I will ever apologize for. And again, I respect anyone's right. They can make their case. They can advocate in court. They can have 50 governors come to their defense. They're entitled to do that. I'm not going to respond to that. But we're also not going to stop doing the work.
Right. Now, you've had critics in terms of this. Longtime New Jersey NCAA President Richard Smith has said there should be a monitor on the OPIA, the Office of Public Integrity and Accountability. Meet other enemies in that in terms of Senate President Scutari, Senator Cryan, Christie himself, U.S. attorney. And, has come out against you. Do you think it's particularly difficult in this state in terms of prosecuting political corruption?
Look, I don't think I've made enemies of all the people you said. I mean, they've had disagreements with me, and look, and I'll say this: it's probably bipartisan. There are people in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, powerful people who haven't liked, the fact that we have taken on corruption in the state. I think it's really sad that New Jersey has the reputation for corruption it has. I love this state.
Right.
Everybody in my family is from this state. I'm raising my kids just a couple miles from where my dad grew up and where my grandparents raised my mom. Like, this is home to me. It wasn't even a choice. I went to public school here, had the privilege of leaving the state for college and law school, but I knew I was coming back. And when you leave, what you learn is people have this perception of who we are as a state, and it's totally wrong. And it's not just the turnpike and the parkway. It's that, everything's corrupt here. And when we don't take that seriously, when we don't address it, when you have these cartoonish corruption stories, then it furthers that stain on our state. And it hurts what good people are doing here. And so, I think, again, anyone in power who's going to sit there and say to me, we don't have a problem, I have seen it with my own eyes. People do get better deals. And that is not something we should be okay with. And all I'm saying is, look, you can say a lot of things about me. No one's ever accused me of being corrupt. I've never let anyone do something for me that I wasn't allowed to. I take that responsibility really seriously as a public official. Public service is hard. It involves sacrifice. I don't think you should get rich off being in public service. I don't think you should abuse your ethics laws. I don't think you should abuse the trust of the public. I think that's not really that controversial. And so if some people don't like that I've said that, sticks and stones.
So be it. Now, you talk about some of the more cartoonish aspects of corruption. You talk about the mob in Morris County. I grew up in Staten Island.
But we welcome you here. You are Newark's own.
Thank you very much. But at the same time, the idea of threat as not being something out of a movie, the idea of threat is real. Have you been personally threatened?
Sure. Yeah.
Often?
Yeah, look, yes. And I think I think that's a broader concern. If we don't take political violence in this country seriously, I got into public service because of the school, in a lot of ways because of Columbine. Gun violence was the issue that got me interested in engaging publicly, and it was because I didn't want to see another generation grow up with this leading cause of death for kids be a firearm. My daughter yesterday, she's 2, she had a school shooting drill. Her first one she had before she could walk. They played Elmo in the closet so that the kids stayed quiet. That's America in 2025.
Right.
And so, the tragedy for that is not just that we're letting kids be killed, though, again, lowest level of gun violence we've ever had in New Jersey. It's that it's become normal. And I really hope this trend of political violence, look, what happened with Judge Salas and Danny,
right.
Horrific tragedy,
right.
Wonderful judge, incredible person. I don't know how she's as brave as she is. I've done a lot of work with her on Danny's Law and others, Daniel's Law. But if we let this become normal, in the same way, unfortunately, this country has seemingly accepted in many parts of the country violence against kids, then we're going to lose our democracy. So yeah, I've received physical threats, but I've also, in New Jersey, I've heard from people, some of the things I've done, they'll come to me and say, I've had people come just more like cautionary, like, listen, Matt, don't take that on. Like, your career's going to be over. It's going to cost you. Like, listen, I didn't know a single person in New Jersey politics when I started here. I got a law degree from Stanford. I have a public education from New Jersey. My wife loves me, I think.
Right.
I got 2 kids. I'll be fine.
Right.
I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I didn't do these things because I was concerned about somehow it affects me professionally. But the physical violence stuff, that is a real concern, not just in New Jersey, but nationally. And we've seen it, and it affects everyone. Melissa Hortman, Donald Trump, Charlie Kirk, Steve Scalise, Gabby Giffords, Esther Salas. Like there's no ideological through line between these people, but there is political violence.
Do you think there's already been some measures taken in New Jersey to protect public officials. Do you think we need to do more?
Well, I'm proud that we've done more, thanks to Judge Salas, than any state in the country. Daniel's Law is something that my office has been proud to defend, and we've successfully defended it and implemented it. But we damn well need to do more, and this should be bipartisan. This shouldn't be something that is different across state lines. We should be able to quickly and conclusively condemn any act of political violence. The fact that there's like even a kind of debate about it. Look, I never met Charlie Kirk.
Right.
I suspect had I met him, we probably would have had pretty serious disagreements about a lot of issues based on things he says. But I do events like he was doing in Utah at College University. I meet with students.
Right.
He's a little bit younger than me. He's got kids not much younger than mine. He's got a wife. Like, I don't think he should be shot in the neck. And I don't think it's hard to say that. And yet, too often now, Josh Shapiro, guy breaks into his house on Passover and throws a Molotov cocktail and nearly burns the whole place down with him and his kids and wife in it.
Right.
Like, we have to think before we condemn that. That's not something that we should allow to be normal. And so I do think there's policies we can do, but at a higher level, we need everyone from the highest office to the lowest office saying this isn't okay. One of the fundamental tenets of a democracy is that we resolve our disputes through voting, through the political debate, through free speech, through argument. We do not resolve them through violence. And you see them in other countries that don't have those rights. Violence is the preferred way to resolve political disputes. And that is a very scary trend and prospect in this country.
Now, you're talking about a classic way that we should resolve disputes in this country is through elections. Another important ruling you made during your time as Attorney General was regarding the practice of the county line. Preferential positioning on ballots. When the moment came, you ultimately said, you know what, this is unconstitutional. When we're talking about at that time, Representative Andy Kim brought the lawsuit that was ultimately successful. Why did you finally, play a role in blowing up one of the most important and impactful pillars of how democracy has been run in New Jersey for generations?
Well, look, that case was presented to us in the form, now Senator Kim filed a preliminary injunction, and sought a preliminary injunction, and what that means is he asked a court to say that the law can't be enforced and is unconstitutional. Right. And our office was asked our views and pursuant to the court rules. And look, as a institutional matter, I believe in defending state laws. I do it all the time. The test is not whether I agree with it or I would have voted for it if I was a member of the legislature. I'm not the entire democratic process, nor should I be. I enforce and defend laws. But there are certain times when, and we laid this out in the letter, which I'm extraordinarily proud of. And I know that, again, very difficult decision, difficult personally, difficult professionally. But I'm proud that we did it because, look, every court that's looked at it agreed with us. The evidence was overwhelming. And as we laid out in the letter, when that law was divorced from the original purpose, which it had been by a series of intervening court decisions that fundamentally changed how ballot bracketing in the state worked, and when as a result, it undermined the democratic process, it isn't afforded the same kind of deference that every other law that we defer to the democratic process gets. So that law, we did not defend. We didn't say no one could defend it. Others put forth their defense, and the judge in that case, and ultimately a 3-judge panel, bipartisan panel, swiftly and resoundingly ruled in ways that agreed with us. Again, I know not everyone liked it. I get that. Right. I don't begrudge them for their views. But we were right.
Now, my general impression is, your real friends are people you didn't make in politics, right?
Other than you.
Thank you. But at the same time, you're not here to make friends now necessarily, but at the same time, that ruling about the line, that in certain ways affected relationship with Governor Murphy. What do you say about that?
Look, I'm extraordinarily proud to have served in Governor Murphy's administration for 7 of the 8 years that he's been in office. I think this administration has done tremendous things. And he and I continue to this day to work extremely well together. And so, regardless of what people may have thought, that hasn't changed the way we've worked together. I didn't come into politics to make friends, or government to make friends. I have good friends. I have friends that have known me forever that don't care at all, don't give two you-know-whats about what I do for work. I coach my kids' soccer teams. I hang out with people here, and I have good friends from politics and government. And some of them have strongly, not just this, have strongly disagreed with things I've done. And sometimes they'll tell me and sometimes they won't. Mm-hmm. But you know what? The real friends are those that you can sit down and say, listen, we didn't agree with you on this. It wasn't personal, but we're still friends. I have great friends who are Republicans. I have friends with Republican attorneys general across this country. We got it in this country and in this state. Politics is not a social club. You can have disagreements. You don't always have to go along and get along just to fit in. That's how junior high school works. It's not how government's supposed to work. Right. So to me, it's listen, you don't want to be my friend because you didn't like something I did professionally? Okay.
Right.
You probably weren't my friend before that.
Right, so don't sit with me at the same table at the cafeteria.
Okay, great. I got other people who sit with me. Or I'm perfectly happy eating alone. So I don't think that's how we should be making decisions. Is it going to upset? This goes back, there's the real corruption, the hard corruption, stealing dollars and all that stuff. Sure. Some of the things we've charged. Then there's that soft corruption of just am I going to offend the person who, supports me or is close to me, or is it going to make some so-and-so who's powerful upset? I'm not saying that's wrong all the time. That's politics to some degree. But when it gets too much, when that's driving all of our decisions and not hey, are we delivering what we promised the people of the state we would do? Am I fulfilling my oath to my office? Is when that's not sort of a foremost concern, that's where we lose our way.
In a couple of ways, talking about legacy, do you expect to stay on as Attorney General?
No, and I never did. And that's why I sort of found during the campaigns, I never spoke to any of the campaigns. And I said very clearly, I'm going to serve till the end of my term. I will turn the lights off on January 20th. And then whoever was elected, and I have tremendous respect for Governor-elect Cheryl. I think obviously they ran a tremendous campaign, and I wish her and her team, knowing how hard that office is to run, I wish them nothing but success. And we have said publicly and privately, anything they need, my office will provide it. They're in transition, and I think they're hitting the ground running. But no, I always expected to leave at the end of this administration. So I sort of found all this talk kind of humorous. The governor will pick her attorney general. That is what the Constitution says she should and will do. And I will be nothing but supportive for that person coming in, and I wish them all the best. The governor's office is an incredible place to work. The attorney general's office is an incredible place to work. Huge responsibilities. The last thing I would ever do, regardless of what I thought about who won or anything like that, was try to make it harder for them. Right. And the people coming in have the right to succeed, regardless of who won that election. And I believe this, and I'm proud to say we're doing this. They have the right to succeed based on the people and policies they want to put in place and nothing else.
So now what? What's next?
I have no idea. I'm a huge Knicks fan. I saw Jalen twisted his ankle last night. So if they need a point guard, I'm not the fastest or the quickest, but I will shoot. I don't know. Look, I just turned 39. So I hope a long road ahead of me. Public service will never sort of leave me. I'm looking forward. I've spent, like I said, the last 10 or 11 years at pretty high levels in the state. I've loved every minute of it.
Right.
I'm really proud of what we've done. And I'm looking forward to having a little bit of time to think, but we'll find some new adventures. I'm not going away. I know one thing, I'm not leaving New Jersey, for sure.
Now, look, you've made quite a splash, Ambition is evident, right? Does staying in New Jersey ultimately mean elected office?
No, it means this is where I like to live. I came here I came back here because we wanted to live here. We moved to Montclair without any kids. Like, I don't know many people who did that. We wanted to be here. So no, I keep hearing, not every decision that people make is based on political ambition. And by the way, a lot of the decisions I have made, if I was purely thinking from a political calculus, I'm not sure they were the smartest decisions.
Right.
We made hard decisions because we thought they were right. And I didn't back down. I wasn't afraid of talking about the work that our office did. I think it's important that the public understands that. I think it's true for whoever's in this seat. So, if that drew attention, I'm sorry. It wasn't meant to be a self-aggrandizing approach to the office. It was meant to be part of the mission of what we do for work. And so I know I'm going to stay here. I know I'm going to stay involved in the things that I care about. I didn't start caring about gun violence and fighting corruption and taking on, things that hurt our kids. I didn't start caring about that in 2022 when I became Attorney General. And I won't stop caring about it on January 20th, 2026. So I will figure out how to stay involved in some way, but this isn't hey, I did all this because it's going to lead to a political career. I said very clearly, for instance, no intention, never even considered running for representative or former now governor-elect seat here in Congress.
Right.
By the way, I think everybody else in the state is running for that seat, so I wish them all well.
Right.
So, not everything is as straight line as people want to make it seem. And I think that was a way, that narrative that was put out there by people who had a vested interest in trying to discredit the work of our office.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's where I think that was coming from.
What do you think ultimately is the most impactful and important thing you did during your time as Attorney General?
I struggle with this question because it's like you love all your children equally. I do think fighting corruption was important. I think it was important to show that this state doesn't tolerate that. I'm extraordinarily proud of our record on gun violence, and I'm proud of the way we did it. Law enforcement, incredible law enforcement work, historic investments in the governor and the legislature have been incredible on this front. In our communities, violence intervention work on the ground.
Right.
I started the first office of the country dedicated to holding bad actors in the firearms industry accountable. We've sued more bad actors in that industry than any other state. I think every other state combined at this point. I'm incredibly proud of the work we've done to combat a mental health crisis, both with our work against social media companies that are fueling it for our kids, and the incredible work with law enforcement to pair them with mental health resources, that we are now the first state in the country to have a program operational statewide where we're taking a clinical approach to people who call 911 with a mental health challenge. And you know who loves it the most? Law enforcement. Because we have been so unfair to them, asking them to do everything. And yet now we've helped almost 14,000 people. We track this, we put it on our website. 0 injuries. We know that 2/3 of those cases, historically, result in use of force.
Right.
And we've had 0 injuries to an officer or to one of our residents. That's a huge success. So there's a lot of things I'm proud of. And, look, the work continues. We're not going to solve justice. I said this the day I was nominated. There's a quote that hangs in my office, Tzedek Tzedek Tirtov. It's a Hebrew quote, which means justice, justice shalt thou pursue. And the transliteration is under it in my office. And the reason why I like that is because we're supposed to pursue justice. You don't complete it. You don't accomplish it. You only get an A and move on to the next class.
Right.
So we've done great work, but that work's going to continue. And this state has a long and frankly bipartisan history of taking on tough issues through our office. And I know they're set up to continue to do that.
Going forward, there's still challenges out there. You took over the Patterson Police Department. There's still problems in municipal.
Should have also said that as one of my proudest moments.
Yeah, why?
Because that city was in crisis. That city has had challenges with law enforcement for decades, going back to when my grandfather went to Eastside High School. And I couldn't sleep at night knowing that there was a crisis in confidence in that city, and that not knowing when the other shoe was going to drop.
Right.
And, look, I recognize not everybody liked that decision, but it worked. Crime is at historic lows in Patterson. Community trust is way up. I spent a lot of time in that city. It is the 3rd largest city in our state. One of the most diverse cities in America. Rich and vibrant community. You want to eat any kind of food, go to Patterson.
Right.
I love that city. And so the fact now that they have a police department that they're proud of, that's functioning at a high level. We're not finished. It's not perfect yet, but it is light years ahead of where it was. We are doing things in Paterson that make it a model in New Jersey and across the country. The residents of that city are proud of that department. Trust us up. Some of the people who were protesting us when we went in there stood with me a few months ago to praise the progress we have made. The pride in that department. When I started, when we took over, the starting salary of an officer in Paterson was $32,000 a year. It was below the poverty line. How can you expect somebody to go put their life on the line when you treat them like that?
Right.
And when I went there that day, when we made that decision, it would have been easy not to do it. I recognize that. We could have sort of let, hey, that's somebody else's problem. We'll deal with the things as they come up, but we're not going to address the issues. When I walked into that department that day, there were barricades in front of that building.
Right.
It was set up to keep people out of their police department. So I wouldn't speak out in front of that building until every barricade was removed. We even had to put a barricade back because we showed the public that there is nobody who wants more crime in their communities. Everybody wants to be safe. That is fundamental human nature. And so what we showed them is that you can both be safe and be treated with respect. And in fact, those two things work hand in hand. And for a city that has had decades, think about Reuben Carter.
Right.
And all of the challenges that they've had. Indictments. They now have a department that is first rate, that is led by incredible professionals. We brought Issa Abbasi over from NYPD. Now Pat Murray is running an incredible department. I have tremendous faith in him. They're not having politicians meddle. They're doing their job, and they're keeping people safe. The stats tell that, but also if you just walk around that city, it is probably the single biggest law enforcement transformation in America. And it happened like that because we broke the glass, we brought in new leadership, with the support of the legislature and the governor, we brought resources to the table, and we fixed the problem.
Two final questions. There's still a lot of work to be done in this state in terms of transparency. You saw what happened with Oprah. Oprah essentially gutted in terms of access to public records. The Election Transparency Act, campaign finance reform, where did this go? So with all these things still in play, what advice would you give to the next Attorney General?
Well, I'll give my advice to them privately, but I think, anybody in this seat, stay true to who you are. I've now seen it. People who were really pissed off at me 6 or 7 years ago are now some of my best friends, and vice versa. That stuff comes and goes. So stay true to who you are and follow that North Star. Do what you think is right. Don't do reckless things, but do what you think is right. Take the information and let the chips fall where they may. And I do hope, some of these trends of gutting transparency or offices that hold accountable, that worries me. And, we're at a time where we need more transparency and more accountability, not less. And I hope folks in power take heed of that, because that's what the public is saying resoundingly.
You took a lot of heat. Was it worth it?
Oh, the heat doesn't bother me. Look, I feel like I did this job the way I said I would do it. When I came into office, I said we wouldn't be afraid of doing anything or holding anyone accountable if they were breaking the law and they were hurting people in our state. You can say a lot of things about me, but I think I've done that.
Attorney General Matthew Platkin, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Great to be here.
So that was my initial sit-down interview with Attorney General Matt Platkin.
Yeah, and he talks you can already see there him talking about the blowback he's been getting and all the things he's done.
Right.
So then we have this hearing where it really quite an ending in his career.
Even for New Jersey.
All right, we have that hearing this week, and then you spoke with him again after that.
Correct.
Here's some audio.
Mr. Platkin, how are you, sir?
Phenomenal.
What's going on?
I'm doing well. It's been quite a week.
Absolutely. Let's go right into it. On Monday, there was a meeting of a Senate panel. The Senate panel was essentially saying that there will be changes at the state comptroller's office. Please cone down some of those changes to me, and what are your problems with these changes?
Hey, look, I think the comptroller for the last 20 years has been the independent agency within the executive branch that holds accountable state and local government for waste, fraud, and abuse. It makes referrals to our office. It's recovered millions and millions of dollars. It's found a whole bunch of wrongdoing. And I think at a time when trust in government is at an all-time low, those are exactly the types of things that we should be standing up for in government. This bill would essentially gut the comptroller of its core powers to issue subpoenas for people who have potentially breached the public trust, or institutions or organizations that have breached the public trust. And I think from my perspective, it would, I think, quite alarmingly allow a body, which I have no problem with them strengthening, that State Commission on Investigation, which is a legislatively appointed body reporting with no employment protections, reporting to political appointees by legislative leadership and the governor, would allow them to do things like wiretap law enforcement that are potentially investigating acts of corruption. It would allow them to prosecute crimes, even though they're constitutionally not allowed to do so. So there's some real flaws in the bill, but the most important thing is the rush process, an effort to gut the comptroller that has done really good work, including, by the way, holding my office and my department accountable when we need to. That's something we should embrace in government. It's not something we should run from.
You know, one thing that's interesting about this wiretap component, essentially this wiretap component would allow investigation of investigators. Are you worried that this would have some sort of chilling effect when state agencies are trying to look into waste, fraud, and abuse and corruption?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, the chairman of the committee yesterday that held the farce of a hearing that was conducted yesterday in the state Senate, he admitted as much on the record. He said this was very much targeting my office. He's a political associate of people that we've prosecuted. So it should alarm everyone. This is never going to pass legal muster. It's a blatantly unconstitutional provision. But the concern should be is that prosecutors and investigators will, I think, justifiably be concerned that, you know, the law will be weaponized against them if they dare to hold the powerful to account. And again, at a moment when trust in government is at an all-time low, we need our law enforcement to feel empowered when someone has broken the law to hold them accountable. I don't care who they are. No one is above the law. No one is below the law. Everyone gets treated the same in my book.
Right. You talked about the constitutionality of this attempted provision. Do you think this whole move is a challenge to the rule of law in the state of New Jersey?
Well, I think it challenges some pretty core fundamental tenets of our Constitution. Look, separation of powers is the core function of our democracy. The legislature is the body that has the awesome responsibility to pass laws. It cannot enforce those laws. That is in the executive branch. And the criminal enforcement agencies in the executive branch in the state of New Jersey is the Attorney General and my office and the county prosecutors in all 21 of our counties. And so we and they are the bodies tasked with enforcing the criminal laws. This bill, for the first time, would blur the lines between the legislature, which again passes laws, and the executive, which enforces them. And that just simply can't be allowed under our constitutional system. This is sort of 101 stuff. And had we been consulted on the bill, I would have given that feedback and hopefully avoided, the mess that we had yesterday.
Longtime observers in Trenton, a lot of them were talking, lawmakers, journalists were talking about this, saying they'd seen nothing like this before, even in New Jersey. When you were going back and forth with the chairman of the committee, James Beach, Senator Beach, a longtime ally of George Norcross, who you have tangled with previously, as we've talked about earlier in this podcast. What do you say what the tone was like in that colloquy between him back and forth, particularly when he's criticizing you personally and directly for your work, saying your investigations have been sloppy?
Yeah, I thought the whole committee hearing yesterday was an embarrassment and beneath the stature of the state Senate. You had a United States Senator, Andy Kim, who showed up for no reason other than that he wanted to speak out in support of good government. He was forced to sit there, clearly intentionally. He was one of the first people to sign up to speak. He was forced to sit for over 5 hours, waiting patiently for his turn. Witnesses who were speaking in favor of the legislation were given unlimited amounts of time, 20, 30, 40 minutes. I didn't keep track, but long period of time. United States Senator was told he had 180 seconds. I mean, how do people take this seriously? The disdain for the people that they serve was very clear on the chairman's face. He was vitriolic. And he wanted to make this about Kevin Walsh and about me. And as I said to him very clearly, this bill isn't about me. First of all, my department isn't even mentioned explicitly in the bill, other than the threat to wiretap us. It doesn't take away any of our powers. I was there to speak out in support of good government. And I'm leaving office on January 20th. And so, his insistence on resorting to ad hominem attacks just underscores the point here that there's not a good policy or legal justification for it. And it was embarrassing. I don't know what Chairman Beach's plans are, but I think he should probably consider hanging it up after that one. I think his time has come.
Got it. Now, did you almost feel like, again, that this whole measure, and again, the bill sponsored by Senate President Nick Scutari, again, a lot of this, the work of the Comptroller's Office have been challenging county organizations, including Union County, where Nick Scutari is from. Do you feel that these people feel that they've been directly challenged by you and Mr. Walsh, and therefore they were attempting to punish you with this measure?
Yeah, look, whatever they were trying to do, I think we have to be clear, the bill is really dangerous. And it undercuts a key government agency that combats corruption at a time when we have too few people and agencies doing that work, not too many. So that's my focus. And, I think people are going to rightly or wrongly draw the conclusion that if you take on powerful interests in New Jersey, the result is your office gets eliminated or you get targeted. And, we see that in Washington right now. We're seeing that from the Trump administration. We need to be an example here in a state that, unfortunately, and we talked about this, Mark, has a stain of a history of corruption. We need to be redoubling our efforts to combat corruption, not undercutting agencies and people who are doing good work.
Right. Now, we've seen recent attacks to transparency in New Jersey. We saw what happened to the Open Public Records Act. We saw what's been happening in terms of campaign financing. Do you think this is part of a trend? And do you think this trend is going to continue?
I think it's fair to look at what's happened and question why we continue to take steps that, in substance and in appearance, appear to be undermining the public's trust in government. And, some of this is process-based. When you introduce a legislation to eliminate a corruption watchdog on the eve of Thanksgiving instead of hearing for Monday morning, and you refuse to let even a United States senator speak all day because you don't want to hear what he has to say, when you scold and chastise constituents who are taking their Monday after a holiday weekend to come to speak out in support of good government, I mean, what message are you sending? And that's why I was disappointed and frankly disturbed coming out of the hearing yesterday. I believe public service is about serving the public. I did not see the public well served by their elected leadership yesterday.
We have a new governor coming in, Democrat Mikey Sherrill. Do you think this measure is somehow also meant, the timing, coming in right before Thanksgiving, right before she comes into office? Do you think this is meant to curtail any effort she might have to combat waste, fraud, and abuse and corruption in New Jersey?
Yeah, again, Mark, Governor-elect Sherrill is somebody of tremendous integrity, and I think she's going to be an extraordinary leader for the state. I look forward to seeing what her administration will accomplish. My focus is on making sure that in this moment, we're not taking away tools that protect the public from being ripped off. Remember, there's no such thing as a free lunch. If there's waste, fraud, and abuse of public monies or public resources, we're all paying for that. And so as the state's chief law enforcement officer, my principal focus is making sure that the residents of this state are protected and that the people in my office that are doing good work, holding powerful people to account criminally and using our civil tools to protect them, to keep their hard-earned dollars from being misused. Well, I'm going to stand up until my very last day in office and speak out for those causes. So that's what I was doing yesterday. And I trust Governor-elect Cheryl, when she becomes governor come January 20th, is going to do an extraordinary job furthering those principles.
Last question. We've talked earlier in this podcast about the idea of you being one of the few people in this state having ruffled a lot of feathers, made a lot of people angry in terms of trying to go after corruption. Was this, final attempt, when you came to the panel and you said specifically, I am going to speak on this as the chief law enforcement officer in this state. Is this just another example of everything that we talked about in this podcast about what it's like to try to go after corruption in this state? And again, even on your very last days, trying to go up against it. Is it almost impossible even to do something about this?
I don't think it's impossible. No, I think look at all of the good work we've done. I think of the fact that I was sitting next to two distinguished public servants, United States Senator, one of 100, state comptroller. I think about the dozens of people who took time out of their busy schedules to show up for good government. I think about, the billions of dollars that we've recovered for the state. I think about the accountability that we have put in place for people who have broken the law. So no, I'm an optimist. And, I'm proud of the fact that just as I came into office saying that I was going to hold powerful to account when they break the law, I'm leaving office the same way. And I get some people don't like that. So be it. I didn't come into the office to make everybody who is powerful, who has broken the law, like me. My job is to make sure that people who are powerful, who break the law, are held accountable. And that's exactly what I've been doing.
Attorney General Matt Platkin, thank you very much.
So there you have it. The day after.
There you go.
The day after the fireworks in Trenton.
Matt Platkin, unrepentant.
Yeah.
Completely.
But what a fitting end to his tenure that hearing was, too.
Absolutely.
And it also forward-looking, it's like, so what happens now? Like, what does Mikey Sherrill do? Like, that's
exactly.
What kind of AG does she appoint? Does she appoint a Platkin?
Right.
Or does she appoint? This is really going to be very interesting.
Right. And again, Matt Platkin was very positive in his comments about Mikey Sherrill, but at the same time, are we going to see someone to follow him who's going to take the same type of approach?
Right.
Because one thing that was relatively about that hearing is you look at the way they dealt with acting controller Kevin Walsh. You look at the way they dealt with U.S. Senator Andy Kim.
Right.
You look at the way they dealt with Matt Platkin. It was almost like an explosion.
It was the Empire Strikes Back.
Completely.
To go with the Death Star metaphor once again.
Completely. And, these rebels are, running from the Empire and,
really,
getting tagged by the Empire. And it just basically seemed to, nobody's perfect, but it seemed to justify everything what Platkin was talking about in the initial interview in terms of how they behaved.
Yeah, it really did. It really did. Like everything I had heard your initial interview before the hearing and watching the hearing and what happened, I'm like, oh my God, this is it.
Yeah, it's not every day, you're told you're not special.
Yeah, that was what they told at Andy Kim, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So there you have it, Matt Platkin. And then, so my mozzarella sticks are here, which reminds me of your cannoli. Matt Platkin with the cannolis. You tried to buy him off with a cannoli. Staten Island man tries to bribe Attorney General of New Jersey with a cannoli.
Yeah, I know. Listen, my potential criminal tendencies started leaking out. So here's what happened. Something I like to do whenever I go to work at the Montclair Film Center, I tape my television show there, New Jersey Now, is I go to Calandras. When I come from Newark, where I live, Calandras, classic Italian pastry spot on Bloomfield Avenue, and I always get a box of cannolis and other assorted pastries that I take to the show, and
for the green room.
I offer it to the
Cannolis
crew.
in the green room.
Exactly, the crew, the guests, everybody have a cannoli. So the inner spirit, you talk about Staten Island, of my grandmother Rose, right, who always wanted to feed. This comes out, right? And we've got the cannolis, and I go, Attorney General, please, take a cannoli for the road. And he's like, no.
You wouldn't have a cannoli?
No, the appearance of impropriety.
That's a little, really?
Listen, like, look
I guess, right?
Look at what we're talking
that's
about.
That's pretty squeaky clean, man.
Right, well, that's what I'm saying. Look at what we're talking about. Look at what happened at this hearing. And in light of that, I got to say to myself, you know what? Maybe once in a while in New Jersey, you need an Elliot Ness.
Maybe he just hates cannoli.
Maybe. Anti-dairy. But I want to say this for the record. Attorney General Platkin, I am sorry. I am sorry I offered you cannoli. I feel bad. I was wrong.
All right.
Right.
All right, good stuff. It's really going to be interesting to see what happens.
Absolutely.
Going forward.
Because, corruption's not going away in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Waste, fraud, and abuse is not going away.
This all falls in Mikey Sherrill's lap now. Which is she come down and try to continue the mantle that Platkin has picked up, or it's going to be interesting.
We're going to find out.
All right, we'll be all over it. All right, that wraps it up.
Thank you.
From the Mark Twain Diner.
Right.
Follow us, subscribe. Yeah, here we go. I'm digging in these mozzarella sticks. Take it easy, everybody.